Hey,
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. We'll start in just a minute here. Right, I see some folks rolling in. We'll give it just another minute or so and let people get in here, and then we'll get started. Right, well, welcome everyone. We're so glad you could join us today. For those of you that I haven't met before, my name is Sara Dart. I'm the Senior Vice President for Education in Ireland, based up in Boston. Although today I'm coming to you from San Antonio, Texas, where it is a balmy 35 degrees, a little unseasonable for Texas. So we'd love to hear who you are, if you want to drop your name and your school or organization into the chat. That would be great. We'd love to see who's joining us today. I should mention that I also have here with me today two of my wonderful colleagues, Shannon Farrelly from University College Dublin, who is in New York, and Maggie Cardosi from University College Cork, who is also in New York. So they're here joining us. They're going to share some input. They've been doing this quite a bit longer than I have, so they know just about everything there is to know. And they'll also be keeping an eye on the chat. So if you have any questions, comments, as we're going through this, feel free to drop those into the chat, and Shannon and Maggie will get you all the answers you need. So we're going to start with the obvious. What's going on with Ireland and COVID-19? And then we'll get into all the good stuff about academic options and scholarships and things like that. So things are actually going pretty well. Right now, almost 92% of the 18+ population in Ireland is fully vaccinated. And there are vaccination clinics on most of the campuses. International students are able to get the vaccine if they, for some reason, don't already have it. Ireland's taking a very measured, evidence-led approach. The universities, in partnership with the health department in Ireland, have really been careful throughout all of this. And so it's been a pretty, I would say, smooth ride for our universities and our students there. And all through this, international students have been considered essential travelers. So Ireland has never closed its borders to students throughout the entire pandemic. A bit about the travel information that you or your students would need to know to enter Ireland. All travelers must fill out a passenger locator form. It's pretty quick, a handful of questions, contact information, that sort of thing. And to enter the country, you either need to provide proof of vaccination or a negative PCR test. But if you're vaccinated, you will not need the test. A bit of kind of a recent update on this is that the date of your last vaccination, and that's the second of the Moderna or the Pfizer, or the first, if it's the Johnson & Johnson, needs to be within the last 270 days, which I think is about 9 months. However, if you've gotten a booster, there is no time limit on that. And your vaccination is, at this point, valid indefinitely. The campuses have all fully reopened. Everything is fully open, all the facilities, all the classes, all the residence halls. Everything is pretty much back to normal. So the students have been back on enjoying their sort of full on-campus experience. The campuses, of course, have taken all sorts of safety measures, and I actually might ask Shannon and Maggie to hop in here and maybe see a little bit about what UCD and UCD and UCC have specifically done to keep students safe.
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in first. I think this is a pretty great representation of kind of how we've dealt with campus safety when it comes to health and safety. What's great is that a lot of these safety measures actually are going to be taken away soon because Ireland has done so well with kind of controlling the infections and things like that. But we've also, for the first part of the pandemic, when we were back face to face, particularly last spring and last fall, we also limited the numbers of students that could be in some of the large lecture halls. So, in addition to requiring face masks inside and washing hands and hand sanitizer everywhere all over the campus, we also made sure that students were observing social distance measures in both the classrooms and our libraries, as well as like our campus canteens.
Yes, students are still following a lot of COVID-related restrictions at the moment as far as mask wearing. That is going to be required in any building across campus, with the exceptions of eating halls. There are contact tracing networks still set up on the college campuses. Vaccination clinics, as mentioned here, are available there, and campaigns to get students to be vaccinated if they are not already. But a lot of the kind of standard mask wearing in academic buildings is still enforced on the college campuses and in those indoor buildings.
Thanks. Okay, so we will leave COVID behind us and move into some of the more fun things. So why is Ireland a good destination for your students? Why might they decide to choose this as the place to do their degree? We make it a very straightforward and easy process. North American students do not need a visa to come to Ireland. Once they're here, or once they're in country, they'll do a registration process with the local authorities, but they don't need to do anything in advance of arriving in Ireland. Ireland has very high employability rates for its graduates. They're some of the most highly desired graduates in the EU. And that's in large part because Irish institutions have such strong ties with local industries, and they really, I think, we put an emphasis on the hands-on experiential aspect of learning. So most programs will have some kind of like work experience requirement, whether it's a co-op or shadowing or doing an internship. Students are really getting that work experience and that opportunity to network before they graduate. So they're well positioned to get those jobs once they do graduate. And undergraduates, once they've graduated, are actually eligible to stay on in Ireland for a full year on the stay back visa. And so they can use those networks that they've developed and the skills to get a job and stay on in Ireland for a full year. For master's programs, master's students, it's a 2-year eligibility to stay on. A little bit about the academics in Ireland and how that is different from the US. Typically in Ireland, students will directly enter into their program. So they'll apply, for instance, for a computer science program at UCD or an art history program at UCC or something like that. They're not the general education requirements that are so typical in the US. Most programs in Ireland won't have that. I think another thing that's quite unique is that there are fields that in the US we would consider to be mostly post-grad fields, like medicine, law, veterinary medicine, where students can actually start that process and do that as an undergraduate degree. And degrees in Ireland can be 3 or 4 years. That depends on what program they're entering. And I'm going to ask Maggie and Shannon to highlight some programs from their institutions that are really popular with students from the US.
University College Dublin does have a program that kind of breaks the mold when you're looking at Ireland for really direct entry programs. So vast majority of our program students do want to be passionate about what they want to study, and they're jumping right into that, and you won't find those same general education requirements that you see at US universities. That really allows the students to be taking their major related classes in their first year. But as something that breaks the mold from that is our liberal arts and sciences program, designed for more flexible entry for students. So it is better suited for someone who might be debating between some major subjects and or somewhat undecided in their pathway. That's not usually someone who is a great fit for direct entry programs, but they would be for liberal arts, because it allows them to start at University College Dublin thinking about a few majors, take courses in those majors in their first year, and declare that major going into the second year. And we'll get to testing requirements later in this presentation, but it also allows further flexibility for testing requirements as well. But it's a very popular program for US students and was really designed with the US student in mind.
And at UCC, we don't have a kind of undecided entry route for students from the US. However, we do have lots of flexible options that are great for students who would know, particularly, they definitely want to be studying, say, the biological or chemical sciences. They just don't know their specialty, or maybe they want to do arts and humanities. But one thing that I think is really unique about us, or one thing that I like really a lot about UCC, is that practical learning is really the cornerstone of our curriculum. So no matter what a student decides to study, whether it's a more flexible option like kind of our arts humanities majors, or particularly like a science or a business related field, they will be very, very likely to have some type of practical learning already folded into their curriculum. So whether that's an internship course, a work placement, or study abroad, students really can kind of apply what they've learned in the classroom outside of that. And just two degrees that I actually really like the most at UCC, which Sara had mentioned, that there are a lot of subjects that you can find at the undergraduate level that may not be available at the undergraduate level in the United States. We have things like public health sciences, criminology, anthropology, and specialty subjects like that might be a little bit more difficult to find in the United States.
Yeah, thanks both of you. And I think those topics that you can do at the undergraduate level in Ireland, another important selling point for students is how much money they can save, essentially doing what would be an undergraduate and graduate degree in the US in just the undergraduate space in Ireland, and still have the appropriate credentials and everything once they graduate. A bit on tuition and cost of living in Ireland. Obviously, it's going to vary based on which institution your student is looking at, but on average, the cost of attendance in Ireland is going to be relatively similar to out-of-state tuition at a public university, and still quite a bit less than many private institutions in the US. All of the universities in Ireland can accept US federal loans and are FAFSA eligible. It's important to know that they cannot, though, accept Pell Grants. It's just the loans that are accepted at Irish institutions. Again, the living costs are going to vary quite a bit. Dublin certainly is going to be a bit more expensive than Limerick or Cork. So it's something, students just want to make sure they're taking a look at, not just the tuition costs, but also the living costs when they're looking at this. On average, the cost of attendance for the academic year, including tuition, living costs, and all of that, is about $37,000. But again, this varies as it does in the US. That's why we want, let's see. Oh, sorry, we do have scholarships coming up. I had thought scholarships were right after this. I promise we will get into scholarships as well. So the application process is a little bit different in Ireland. When students apply in the US, yes, it's about their transcript and their test scores in some cases, but there are also recommendations, extracurriculars, personal statements, all this. The process is a bit more streamlined in the Irish context. And so instead of me getting too much into this, I'm going to turn it back over to Shannon and Maggie.
I can start and then Maggie jump in with additional requirements. First and foremost will be the high school transcript. We, as representatives of the university, may be reading the applications ourselves or may have teams over at the campus that will read the applications and are prepared to look at IB requirements, AP requirements, SAT, ACT, general high school diploma from a US. We are trained to be looking and assessing requirements from around the globe in many aspects. For the vast majority of US students, though, we will be requiring a high school transcript, and there is often a GPA requirement. As an example, at UCD, we would be looking for usually at least a 3.0 GPA. And then depending on which program you're applying to, there would be varying degrees of requirements beyond that, possibly higher GPA, possibly testing requirements, especially when we look into the engineering and the science type subjects that would have to show certain level of proficiencies in math or science. And I'll let Maggie maybe touch upon the text flexibility as well.
Sure. So these past couple of years, most Irish, most if not all Irish institutions have become test flexible. And that means that for the vast majority of the degrees that we offer, we give students the flexibility to only apply with their high school transcript, recommendations, and personal statement. We're test flexible because there are some degree programs that particularly might have math or science requirements that may need to see some type of additional qualification on top of those ones that I mentioned before. So for example, a degree program that may have a heavy lab science component to it, the university is going to either need to see an AP exam that is in a lab science or maybe an equivalent course. The flexible part, I think all of us are trying to really be true to that statement, where we understand that these opportunities and the availability and equitable availability of these tests, it's been really tough these past couple of years. So for UCC in particular, if a student is truly not in a position to submit ACT, SAT, or AP exam scores, they can contact our admissions office directly, and we'll work with that student to try to find some other piece of their application, maybe a college level direct enrollment class or something similar that we can look at for that lab science requirement or that math requirement in lieu of scores.
I think the major difference when you're looking at the application process at an Irish institution versus the US is that we actually have minimum requirements versus a ballpark figure of who got in last year. So it'd be really, I would, in my opinion, quite transparent if you can find the entry requirements on the institution's websites to review those, because at least many of the institutions will have that you need this, this, and this in order to get in. And a student really should have an idea already when they're applying if they're going to meet those requirements. We know AP classes happen and they don't know their results until July. We know those things. We have systems set up to help students there. But generally a student should have an idea already if they're going to meet those minimum requirements as they apply. And if not, team members like ourselves are very happy to make those connections for you and the students.
Absolutely. That's such a great point to make, Shannon. And I think the other thing to be aware of is that each of our degree programs typically have different requirements. So it's not, a blanket statement of you need exactly this GPA and test score range to get into everything. So if you're working with a student who's maybe interested in English or history, their requirements are going to look a little bit different for a student who is interested in biology or chemistry or engineering. So just to be aware of that. And always there are representatives like myself and Shannon who are there to help you navigate the process. We know that every student is different and every university is different. So we'll do our absolute best to make sure that you have all the information that you need to help your students make the best decision for them and their families.
Can one of you also say something quickly about the timeline for the process? Because that's also a bit different from how it typically happens in the US.
Yeah, I would say so. Each university is going to have just a minorly different process. So, like for UCC, we open up our applications a little bit later in the game than some other universities. Like we open up in December for rolling admission, but and then our application stays open till about May 31st. I think Shannon UCD is, I think, open a little bit earlier and a little bit later. But generally, I think when it comes to the May 1st deadline, we try to stick to that. So, we're not going to ask students to commit to one of our universities before the May 1st deadline, just to be able to give them and their families that time and space to consider all of those options.
But many of us remain open through the spring and even into the summer. So there is quite a degree of flexibility with those. And there are a handful of Irish universities on the common application as well.
And how quickly will a student find out, typically once they've applied?
Generally, I would guess in the 4 to 6 weeks. I'm not sure if that is the same for every Irish university, but I would say for most.
I agree with that statement.
Great. Thanks. So a couple other benefits or things to be aware of with doing your degree in Ireland. One of the really great opportunities is that students can avail of the Erasmus program, which is a study abroad exchange program within Europe. So students can go to many other universities in Europe to spend a semester or a year and would pay the same tuition that they are paying at their home university in Ireland, which I think is an absolutely enormous opportunity. So they could not only have, their degree program in Cork or Dublin, but could also then go and spend a year in Italy or Poland or something like that. We talked a bit about this earlier, but I really, it's worth mentioning again that the work experience and co-op opportunities are really such an important part of degree programs in Ireland at really all of the institutions. Dublin is known as the Silicon Valley of Europe. Everybody from LinkedIn to Indeed to Facebook, all have their European headquarters in Ireland. And so the opportunities that students get to really take advantage of those connections and the relationships between the universities and industry in Ireland, I think is one of the things that really makes Ireland a great destination. And many of these companies too will also have US offices. And so, maybe the student does their internship at Google in Dublin, and that helps them, potentially get a job at Google back in the US or, any of those other multinational companies. Scholarships, as promised. Their scholarships in Ireland are typically merit-based. There are, they'll vary by institution, but they're both full and partial awards. So a couple places that you or students can look for those, certainly of course on the institution websites. Also the government of Ireland offers scholarships every year at both the undergraduate and postgraduate level, and those scholarships are specifically for international students studying in Ireland. And then we also post a lot of scholarships that we come across out there on our Edu Ireland social media accounts. So that's also a good place for you and your students to keep an eye out. And Maggie and Shannon, if you want to come in and just say something briefly about opportunities for international students at your institutions.
University College Dublin offers only merit-based scholarships for the most part. There are scholarships available at the time of offer. So when a student applies, their application is reviewed and an international student scholarship might be tied to that offer letter that they then receive in that 4 to 6 week or so timeline. There are programs such as medicine or veterinary medicine that are excluded from our scholarship schemes due to the competitive nature of those programs. And then we also offer college level scholarships. So the College of Engineering may have their own specific scholarship scheme. And then we're actually currently doing some very fun phone calls this week, offering a select group of students 50% and 100% tuition scholarships. And there are winners for our Global Excellence scholarships, again, based on a merit and a separate essay-based application. So there really are some really great resources that, again, the admissions team would be happy to review if it's not clear on our websites how to make those scholarships available and how to apply.
At UCC, all of our scholarships are merit-based and based on the information that the student would apply with in their original application. So we don't have any additional awards. And they're all listed on our international webpage, and they're based on which college the student is applying to. So the awards would range anywhere from an automatic, maybe €5,000 off of the student's tuition payments once they commit to the university, to up to 25% off of their tuition, kind of depending on the program that they're applying to. So it's a little bit more, I guess, standardized, and you can find that on our website. And the students don't need to do anything to kind of receive those scholarships other than submit their application and then submit their tuition deposit once they commit to the university.
Great. I want to share a little bit of news about a couple of the events coming up. You may know that on March 5th, we'll be hosting our Study in Ireland virtual fair. Maggie and Shannon and many of their colleagues at the other institutions will be there. So we encourage you to join us for that, or to share this with students and parents as well. We've got the URL on here, but also one of my colleagues, Sav, is going to drop that into the chat so that you can access that as well. It's very quick to sign up. As part of the fair, we will have all of these great institutions represented, but we'll also have a couple of live seminars on a number of different topics. These are some of the topics you'll typically see during our fairs, and where we will have sometimes students presenting or representatives from universities, alumni, just different folks coming in to share their perspective in real time so that attendees can hear from them and also ask lots of questions. So we encourage you to check this out. And if you're interested in sharing it with your students, I believe Stav will also drop the link to the Google Drive that has some social media posts and some further information if you'd like to share it with your students and their families. I also want to share quickly about next year's Education in Ireland Counselor Tour. We're very excited to announce that that's going to take place from February 26th to March 4th. The tour visits 5 different colleges and universities across Ireland. Those are to be determined, but it'll be a great visit, chance to meet Shannon, Maggie, many of their colleagues in person, and to check out Ireland and campuses. If this is something you're interested in, you can scan the QR code or just take a snap of that URL, and we just have a short interest form. And once the application opens, which is likely to be in the summer, we'll shoot you an email so that you can put your name in the hat for that if you're interested. And with that, I've put up all of our social media, my contact information, Maggie and Shannon too, maybe if you want to drop your emails in the chat. And I guess one thing, if you walk away with nothing else from this, please know that the folks who work at these universities are always really happy to chat with you and to answer questions. Shannon and Maggie certainly, and also their colleagues at all of the other universities too, are just really happy to engage. And with that, I have not really been, okay, I'm keeping a good eye on the chat, but I've got it open now. I see a couple of questions. Amy, can you explain who is eligible for the tour? Yes, Amy, it is both school-based counselors and independent counselors. There's no specific requirement on that. Okay. Maggie, Shannon, have I missed any questions? It looks like you guys have been doing a great job of keeping an eye on these.
To answer some of the great questions coming in. There's some challenging ones to answer because I could answer from UCD's perspective and Maggie can answer from UCC, but there's a lot of great Irish institutions not being represented here today. I don't want to speak for everyone. One question was trying to figure out, there is a number of universities in Ireland. How can you find out more about what might be the best fit, or how to make those comparisons of universities in Ireland to XYZ in the US? I mean, you can always look at rankings. We know rankings, just may prioritize some things over others that a student may not prioritize in their college search. I would say utilize information on the Education in Ireland website to try and first navigate, rural versus urban versus suburban type of institutions when you're looking for a student fit. Size, or various sizes of institutions in Ireland are offered, and then there certainly will come certain levels of reputation as well on what the institution is known for. So maybe apply for the Counselor Tour 2023, and you will get firsthand knowledge of trying to get some of that information that you can distill to your students as well.
Yes, definitely. And I'd say too, it's sometimes hard to make those comparisons, but I saw in the chat and I completely understand where that question comes from, because I absolutely, it's great to kind of like have a list of, okay, if you like this school, you're going to like this school. So, what I would say, if you're looking, say at UCC, we are a large scale research institution. We've got about 22,000 students on the campus, and we're urban as well. So 15-minute walk from the city center. So if a student is looking at, schools that kind of fit that bill, they're probably going to like us too. And, Shannon represents UCD, which is in the other capital, I guess, the actual real capital of Ireland. So Shannon, do you want to maybe just give like a couple quick stats about UCD so those who are in the audience can kind of get an idea of that? And then absolutely come see us all, not next Saturday. Wait, yes, March 5th. And then you can get to learn about everybody else, because we've got some really great colleagues who are going to be there.
Yeah, I mean, I often associate UCD as kind of like the state school in your big state, the school, a number one choice often where Irish students may want to go for many different types of reasons. We're a large institution, research-based, but still undergraduate heavy. Large institution as in we have over 15,000 undergraduate students, varying subjects from law to being the only veterinary medicine school in Ireland. I mean, there's a lot of reasons, including location, that students might be attracted to a UCD and other institutions around Ireland. We're that college that's in the city but not in the city type of environment. From that's at least the feedback we hear from the U.S. students and what they're looking for. 3 and 4 year degrees, and I would say the liberal arts and sciences program is a major attractor for U.S. students, is why UCD might also be the best fit.
Cool. And I also, let's see, there's a few questions here that I want to make sure that we get to, because they were kind of toward the top of the chat. So I want the people who submitted those to know that we definitely did not forget you. Let's see, first off, around kind of finances, I saw this question from Tara around kind of, what type of student, is students or families with kind of a certain level of income, who is going to be the best fit for an Irish school. I would say those families that can, afford the out-of-pocket costs of that kind of, $30,000 to $40,000 cost of attendance, those families are going to be the best fit for Irish schools. As Sarah mentioned, the Irish institutions do allow students to utilize FAFSA loans, but for students from families that would maybe have to be financing an entire education off of loans, but maybe have other need-based aid opportunities in the US, maybe a semester abroad at one of our universities, it might be a better choice in this instance. And, I'd also say that, while we absolutely, want to work with your students and, we want them to come over for those 3 and 4 year degree programs, we also have lots of other opportunities. So whether that's a semester abroad with one of our partner institutions, or even a master's degree with us, after they finish their bachelor's program, we're still going to be here. So, even if that bachelor's degree option isn't the best fit for a student or their family, we hope that they won't forget us and they'll still want to come experience Ireland in another way at a later date. Let's see, Shannon, do you see any other questions that we missed here? I think there's
I think racial and international diversity, academic support programs questions. I mean, certainly excellent questions and resources that we would love to share with you from each of our universities. Certainly lots of academic support, accessibility programs at our universities. For racial and international diversity, generally Irish institutions will measure diversity by international students based on their own stats. So I know for UCD, we're up toward 29% of our student body is international, meaning the rest is generally from the island of Ireland. But further breakdown of that would certainly change from one university to the next.
Mm-hmm. And I think all of us, have really great support systems, around, students, helping them kind of with academics and things like that. So, diversity, equity, and inclusion is important to all of our universities, and each of us have initiatives that are making sure that there are policies in place to ensure these things. So, if that's something that you're interested in, please come and see us. You're welcome to reach out to me and Shannon individually, or you can come see all of us on March 5th. And I think each of us would love to talk a little bit more about the kind of individual things that each of our universities are doing to make sure that all of our students are feeling included and like they're an integral member of the campus community.
Yeah, and I also mentioned that Education in Ireland, as well as most of the Irish universities, are members of Diversity Abroad, which is a leading organization here in the US that supports diversity, equity, and inclusion in international education broadly. So both at the full degree and study abroad level.
For the health insurance question, very practical question that we often would get asked as well. US students are required to have a level of insurance, and there is some minimums in order to be full-time students in Ireland. So that is something generally, my overall generalization is that insurance is cheaper to receive in a private capacity in Ireland than it is in the US, but it is still a requirement for students to have. And then I guess on a similar question that was asked earlier, it was about EU fees. We meet a lot of dual citizens between Ireland, between the US and Europe, especially the US and Ireland. But citizenship and a passport alone will not get you EU fees. Students would have to go through an application and verification process that usually requires some level of residency, either previously or currently in Ireland, and we can point you to those rules and regulations for your students.
Can either of you speak to this question about the Erasmus program?
For the Erasmus programs, I mean, generally my talking point around that is that all UCD and all Irish university students are Irish university students, so generally they can attend the math workshop or the writing center, academic support places on campus. They can also access study abroad and exchange programs. There can be some exceptions if students are on US federal aid and federal loans. Sometimes there is some qualifications that the US government puts on where you can spend that funding, but not from the university standpoint.
Good distinction, Shannon. It's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's a bit like here, where there may be some exchange relationships specifically that are oversubscribed or quite difficult to get a spot in, but not all of them, and it wouldn't be something that would be different for US students than it would be for Irish students.
And I just wanted to speak one more. I saw another question that came in pretty early about kind of, how do US students, are they able to stay in Ireland, or how do they find kind of the experience of life after graduation? Like we mentioned, we have for students who graduate with a bachelor's degree, that automatic 1-year stay back visa. And then if students graduate with a master's degree, they get an automatic 2-year stay back visa. In my experience, our students are kind of split half and half as to, how they choose to spend their time. And I think it really depends on the student in question. Some students are kind of set on heading back home for whatever reason and finding employment there. And, but then the other half are equally happy to kind of, pursue opportunities that maybe they worked with our career services centers on finding, or, maybe found another pathway into for that time. So it's not an easy answer, but I think it speaks to the kind of flexibility and the availability of different options that we give to our students. So they have the ability to head back to the US and, enter the job market or apply to further study with that Irish degree, or stick around in Ireland for that time to do the exact same thing, which is really great.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned career centers. I think their career centers at the universities in Ireland are going to be very similar to what you would find in the US, really robust offerings, supporting students in a variety of different ways. And in general, a lot of those types of student support systems are going to be similar to what you will find in the US, because I think the level of pastoral care at Irish universities is very high, the way that it is in the US as well.
Also, there's not, there's quite a demand for US students that maybe we want to stay on in Ireland. There's quite a demand for US students who are there doing their full-time study and plan to work and come back to the US, but there's also a lot of demand from Irish students who seek to work in the US. So our career centers are absolutely in the know and are well supported to help students with global goals for their employment and graduate opportunities, more so than ever before, because Ireland is becoming more and more full of multinational companies, US companies in particular, and our career centers are certainly growing to meet that need.
Yeah, and also we have extensive alumni networks across the United States. So, that's also something that I think in the United States, we see a lot of kind of like the alumni kind of groups all over in different cities. I know I'm definitely part of one from my institution, but it's the same goes for Irish universities. So students or parents are interested in exploring kind of, what somebody who's living in New York City does with an Irish degree, or in whatever city you're from. I would definitely reach out to those alumni networks or kind of see what they're up to, because then, your students can talk to folks who've been in their position, a few years ahead of them, to see, what their life is like on this side of the pond after graduating with an Irish degree.
Is there anything else, any other questions either of you had noticed that you wanted to speak on? I will say one came in from someone who is interested in schools that offer degrees in particular areas, asking kind of what the resources would be there. And I would say, if you are interested in finding out about great programs in music and theater, or in computer science or biological sciences, I'm often a good starting point for that. And I'm happy to, to talk to any counselor who, is looking for programs in music and theater, and I can give you, a list of good options with contact information for folks at the various universities. So if you're kind of not sure like how to find a program or something in general in Ireland, you feel free to come to me, and I'm happy to help with that. And the next slide has my email address on it. Well, we just had a question come in about foreign language programs at Irish universities. Maggie and Shannon, do you know if either of your institutions have strong offerings?
Certainly lots of strong offerings in modern languages, mostly European languages. And then as far as the Asian languages, UCD has a lot of partnerships and partner universities in China specifically. So there is a very strong correlation with our law and our business programs to be able to focus in on Chinese relations and specifically language. Beyond that, I'm not sure that we have many extensive offerings beyond those that I said.
I think we would be pretty similar. I know we do have kind of like Chinese language is one of the ones that's offered kind of across the board, both for arts and business students. And then we have quite an extensive offering when it comes to European languages, everything from kind of Latin and ancient Greek all the way up to, like Spanish, Italian, German, Portuguese. And this would be, students can take these languages at kind of a beginner level all the way up to an extremely advanced level if they're looking to go and study, say, in China or in, say, Germany as part of their kind of semester or year abroad. We also have an Asian Studies degree program that students can take advantage of if they're interested in that field in particular.
And feel free, if there are other specific languages you're looking for, feel free to email me and I'm happy to follow up with that. And that, I know we ran a little over. We had intended to finish a little while ago, but there were so many great questions. Thanks Maggie and Shannon for being willing to stay on a little bit longer, and to all of you who stayed with us and asked so many great questions. We hope that we'll see you at the fair next Saturday. Yes. And in the meantime, we're always happy to connect and to answer any questions, all three of us. So always feel free to reach out. And enjoy the rest of your week. Have a wonderful weekend, folks.
Thanks everyone for joining.